In 2011, the most famous artist in China disappeared. He was walking through the Beijing airport, about to board a flight to Hong Kong. Suddenly, Chinese state security intercepted him. A black hood was thrown over his head. He was dragged into a van and driven to a secret location. For 81 days, the world had no idea where he was. This wasn't a normal prison. He was in a black site, a windowless room padded with foam. He was never alone. 2 military guards stood inside the tiny room with him, 24 hours a day. They stood less than 3 feet away. They watched him eat. They watched him sleep. Most humiliating of all, they stood right next to him while he used the toilet. They were forbidden to speak to him. Their goal was simple: total psychological dominance and to break his mind. But they made a critical mistake. They thought they had arrested a dissident, but they had arrested someone that would outsmart their every move with his unique blend of contemporary art practice and human rights activism. His name is Ai Weiwei, and this is the story of how one man used art to stand for freedom, even against a superpower. To understand the man in the cell, you have to understand the boy in the dugout. Ai Weiwei says he was born radical. He didn't have a choice. His father was Ai Qing, one of China's most celebrated poets. But in 1958, being a poet was dangerous. During the anti-rightist movement, his father was denounced as an enemy of the state.
My father was arrested 80 years ago, being put in jail for 6 years. So we have been accused as the same crime, but in very different political government.
The family was exiled to Little Siberia, a brutal labor camp on the edge of the Gobi Desert. Ai Weiwei didn't grow up in a house. He grew up in a hole in the ground, covered with brush and mud. But the defining moment of his childhood wasn't the poverty. It was the toilets. As punishment, his father, a sophisticated intellectual who had studied in Paris, was forced to clean the communal latrines for the entire village. It was meant to be the ultimate humiliation, a way to break his spirit. But the young Ai Weiwei watched his father do something extraordinary. He didn't complain. He didn't despair. He cleaned those toilets until they were spotless. He performed the lowest task with the highest level of dignity. He taught his son a lesson that would define his entire career. The state can take your title. They can take your home. They can even take your freedom. But they cannot take your humanity unless you give it to them. Ai Weiwei never forgot that lesson. The turning point came in 2008. It was supposed to be China's coming out party, the Beijing Olympics. The slogan was "One World, One Dream." Ai Weiwei was initially a part of that dream, helping design the famous Bird's Nest Stadium. But as the games approached, he realized the event wasn't a celebration. It was a mask. And on May 12th, the mask cracked. A massive earthquake struck Sichuan province. 87,000 people died. But as the dust settled, a horrific pattern emerged. In town after town, the government party headquarters stood firm. But the schools collapsed. They had been built with cheap concrete and insufficient steel. Corruption eating away at the structures meant to house the nation's future. Locals called them tofu dreg projects. Thousands of children were buried under the rubble of their own classrooms. The state's reaction wasn't to mourn, it was to erase. They refused to release the death toll. They silenced the grieving parents to preserve the harmony for the Olympics. This is where Ai Weiwei the artist became Ai Weiwei the activist. He realized that he couldn't just make art about this. He had to act. He launched a citizens' investigation. He recruited volunteers to go into the disaster zone, knocking on doors, scouring the rubble, and facing police harassment. Their mission was humanitarian: find the names. When the state tried to bury the victims in silence, Ai Weiwei dug them up. publishing the names of 5,196 dead students on his blog. But to make the world feel the weight of this tragedy, data wasn't enough. He needed to transmute this forensic evidence into art. He bought 200 tons of the twisted steel rebar from the collapsed schools. He brought it to his studio, and in a work titled Straight, he and his team spent years meticulously hammering every single bar until it was perfectly straight again. It looks like a minimalist sculpture, a heavy, silent wave of steel. But by placing it in a gallery, he made the silence of those children echo in the halls of power. He transmuted the physical evidence of the state's corruption into a monument they could not hide. The Chinese Communist Party relies on culture for its legitimacy by claiming to be the guardians of 5,000 years of glorious history. But the Tofu Dreg schools proved they were willing to sacrifice the future of that culture, the education and safety of their children, for quick profit and false esteem. Ai Weiwei saw the hypocrisy. He realized the state treats culture not as a heritage to be protected, but as a political tool to be used. So, he decided to attack that tool directly. In 1995, he performed his most infamous act. He took a Han Dynasty ceremonial urn. It was 2,000 years old, a priceless sacred artifact. He looked at the camera. His face was totally emotionless, and he dropped it. The art world was horrified. They called him a vandal, but they missed the point. Ai Weiwei wasn't just breaking a pot. He was reenacting the logic of the Cultural Revolution, where the regime destroyed the four olds to build a new society. His argument was brutal. You claim to value this pot because it is history. Then why do you destroy the historic neighborhoods of Beijing to build highways? Why do you destroy the minds of students with censorship? He was showing us that in the eyes of the state, culture is disposable. By smashing the urn, he didn't just destroy an object. He shattered the illusion of the state's moral authority. He proved that you cannot truly value an object from the past if you do not value the human life of the present. But when you strip away the state's mask, the state eventually strikes back. And in 2011, they finally came for him. The conflict reached its breaking point on April 3rd, 2011. Ai Weiwei was at the Beijing airport, heading to Hong Kong. He never made the flight. Authorities threw a black hood over his head and drove him to a secret location. For 81 days, he vanished. He wasn't in a jail, he was in a black site. He was locked in a tiny padded room with the curtains drawn. He was never alone. 2 military guards stood inside the room 24 hours a day. They stood exactly 80 centimeters away from him. They watched him eat. They watched him sleep. Most humiliating of all, they stood right next to him while he used the toilet. They were forbidden to speak to him. The goal was simple: to strip him of his dignity until he broke, to make him feel like he was already dead. But Ai Weiwei didn't break. He did what he always does. He observed. He treated his torture like research. He memorized the dimensions of the room. He memorized the plastic wrapping on the walls. He memorized the uniforms. When he was finally released, the state warned him to stay silent. Instead, he built Sacred. He created 6 massive iron boxes. Inside each one, he built a hyper-realistic diorama of his cell, accurate to the millimeter. Viewers had to look through small peepholes in the wall. When you looked inside, you saw the fiberglass figure of Ai Weiwei, eating, sleeping, and showering with the guards towering over him. He turned their secret torture chamber into a global spectacle. He forced the world to witness exactly what the state tried to hide. He proved that you can imprison the artist, but you cannot imprison the art.
I think we're born as a free person. That we have to stand. We have to really understand that point.
We have to fight for it to keep it.
Yes, and to maintain that little freedom, it takes a lifetime effort.
The Chinese state realized they couldn't break him on the inside, so they tried to control him on the outside. When he returned to his studio in Beijing, he found himself in a digital prison. The government installed 20 surveillance cameras around his home. They set up a police station right outside his gate. Years later, he would even find bugs, listening devices, hidden behind the electrical sockets in his bedroom. They wanted him to live in fear. They wanted him to self-censor. But Ai Weiwei realized that surveillance relies on a power imbalance. I watch you, but you can't watch me. So, he flipped the script. On the 1-year anniversary of his arrest, he installed his own cameras. He put them in his bedroom, his office, his courtyard, and he launched WeiWeiCam.com. He live-streamed his entire life to the world, 24 hours a day. He effectively told the Chinese Communist Party, "You want to watch me? Fine, but you don't get to be the only ones. I will let the whole world watch me." By making his life transparent, he made their surveillance redundant. He turned their own weapon against them. The authorities were furious. They ordered him to shut the site down within 46 hours. But the point had been made. Ai Weiwei proved that in the digital age, transparency is the ultimate antidote to authoritarianism. The state can bulldoze a studio. They can smash a camera. They can even lock up a man. But they cannot destroy an idea once it has been shared. Ai Weiwei started as the son of an exile, watching his father clean toilets in the Gobi Desert. He ended up as the most dangerous artist in the world, not because he has an army, but because he realized that if you refuse to be afraid, you are already free.